Good afternoon. Let's formally begin the retreat, but I like the energy and I like the discussion. I know we don't often get a chance to talk amongst one another, and so that's the purpose of today, so that we can have good dialogues on things that are coming, and of course that's going to be Guided Pathways. So I want to welcome all of you. We have faculty, we got counselors, we have classified. You're all welcome to the retreat. There's food provided as well as cheesecake that John wanted me to announce. Very informal. There's areas for you to sit. If you want to sit on the side, if you want to sit on the floor, that's fine. If we need more chairs, I have the key for the next room. I will bring him here. So this is a chance for us to learn. This is a chance for us to also ask a lot of questions. And I wanted to educate the Senate and the college about what's going to be happening as we move forward with Guided Pathways. I can announce that the Senate approved our plan a couple of minutes ago. So, and for me to do that, I invited two wonderful faculty from the State Academic Senate. So Kenna and I will be introducing them. Now, I'll get to introduce Randy. Some of you, actually, I've not had a chance to thank Randy because last June, when I was elected as Senate President, I went to the leadership training with the same face that everybody had, the face that says, why did I do it? Why did I say yes? Frightened, you name it, it was there from every single person. But there was a breakout where it was how to get involved with the state Senate. And Randy was one of the presenters, and luckily for me, there were only two newly Senate presidents that got to be part of that, which meant we got a one-to-one talk, which made a big difference. And so Randy ensured that it was going to be okay, you're going to do a good job, and hopefully I've been doing something like that. So today hopefully he wasn't testing me and taking notes, but any suggestions, I'll gladly take it. More cheesecake. Noted. So I want to thank Randy, and I'm glad that he's here to ask, to inform us about Guided Pathways. But I think without that pep talk, I think it would have been a little more difficult. And at the end of that meeting, it was sign your name here because then we might consider you for the state. And a couple of weeks later, I got informed that I'm not part of the statewide CTE committee. Thanks, Randy. But I want to thank you in front of everybody for giving me the confidence that I really needed. Kenna?
Thank you to Randy for that. So I'd like to introduce Michelle Pilati. She is a professor of psychology from Rio Hondo College, and she has held many leadership positions, so I don't want to take forever to introduce her, so I'll just make some highlights for you. Currently at Rio Hondo, she is the co-chair of the curriculum committee, and she has served as the distance learning coordinator. That's locally in Rio Hondo. Statewide, she is the past president of the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges. She served as the faculty coordinator of statewide career pathways and also for CID, and also as the project director for linked learning pathways to the baccalaureate. Currently, she's involved with Guided Pathways and particularly with the tool development. So she and Randy both are very knowledgeable about Guided Pathways, and so we're very happy to have both of them here. And both have made numerous presentations at numerous conferences, but they both recently have been presenting at the IEPI Institutes, which is where the Guided Pathway folks from Long Beach City College, those are the institutes that we've been attending. So without further ado, I think we're going to
introduce Randy and Michelle.
Yeah.
So even though there are a lot of you and just the two of us, to the greatest extent possible, we would really like this to be a conversation as opposed to us talking at you. We came armed, as is our way, with PowerPoint slides, but we are hoping that those slides will just kick off more conversation. So we invite you to make it clear that you want to speak by raising your hand or doing other appropriate gestures to let us know that you want to join into the conversation. Just a little bit more on our background. We actually were with another college last Friday where we sat with them and just talked through guided pathways for 4 hours. So, and it was a group a lot smaller than this. So we're kind of used to this, but not used to such a large group with mixed perspectives. We also share with you being part of the 20 colleges that are part of California Guided Pathways. And in our conversations, I think there are missteps that can happen if you are part of that group where you sort of feel like you're supposed to be out in front of everyone else, but you haven't necessarily had the time or the resources to do the work to be out in front of everyone else. And so I think that's a really important thing to recognize. If you look at our colleges and where they are with respect to guided pathways, only 75% of our colleges have every reason to be absolutely nowhere with respect to guided pathways. They were just simply asked to do an assessment and now asked to submit a plan, and they had no money, no commitment with respect to guided pathways at all. Now, you guys and us, as being from colleges that are part of the 20, we've sort of had to kickstart our efforts and been part of ongoing efforts to help us move forward. So it's just really important to recognize that if you are feeling like you're not quite sure what it's all about, that's okay. Having said that, let's see, I'd rather phrase it in the positive. How many of you believe you have a firm and comprehensive understanding of what guided pathways is? Okay, oh, I did that well. I made it so positive no one wanted to admit to it. That's great.
Does that mean you read the book and you're good to go? Is that what that means? You read the book. All right.
So as always, there are no stupid questions, and we're open to taking this conversation in whatever direction you need it to go.
And it might be helpful, just in case you don't know, I'm at Southwestern, and I want you to know what we look like so that you get a sense that we may be similar or dissimilar from you as we talk about our different college experiences. Southwestern is about 20,000 head count. We are about 14,500 FTS, somewhere in that ballpark. So some of the things that we're doing as one of the 20 may or may not look like what you're doing, and the scale that we're trying to achieve may or may not look like where you are. Does that sound comparable to LECC? So in Rio Hondo's situation?
Pretty close.
Pretty close. So some of what we can share about our experiences may sound very similar to where you are too.
So what we have planned to talk about, and we'll go through things as quickly or as slowly as you want us to, very briefly, what are guided pathways, why guided pathways, who must be involved, a little conversation about how it's being implemented here. We want to talk about common concerns, and we want discussion questions all throughout this. We really don't want to be talking at you. It's Friday afternoon, you're sleepy, we're sleepy. Let's keep each other engaged. So one of the things that we think is incredibly important to remember ultimately is that this is all about the students. And it's very easy when particularly talking about some of the harder conversations that you have to have in a guided pathways context. That could cause seizures. It's very easy to start thinking about what the impact it would be on you and your program as opposed to stepping back and saying, how do I clear the pathway for my students? So we want to start off by asking, what are guided pathways? What is your definition? Can any of you provide a definition of guided pathways? No, like checking books or anything. Yes.
Career roadmaps?
Career roadmaps, okay. There was someone over here.
Giving students a prescribed path of how to pick courses and get through the degree program.
Okay, giving students a prescribed pathway. What else? Anything else?
Those are two very concrete
Yeah.
definitions, right? So think about it in abstract as well.
So it would include resources, where to get them, very clear, who's responsible for where they could get help and support at what stages.
So pathways, and then also resources to help them get onto the pathways and stay on the pathways.
I mean, combining the two, the educational pathways but the primacy is to ending in jobs.
So it's about where you're ultimately going to be down the road, not just getting that degree, but ultimately what are you going to do when you're done with your education, and how does your education to community college actually feed into your later life and work?
Michelle, Martha, you have to be behind
Okay.
the podium for the audio since we're recording.
All right, sorry. What if I go up there if I don't want them to hear me, right?
Yeah. There we go.
So there was a hand back over there. Someone get scared from us, we were reminded that we're audio. Oh,
I
there.
was actually thinking about the process of it's really a mentoring process, a facilitation process with the student.
So yeah, good. Other elements? Yeah.
A mechanism whereby the state can reduce the cost of career students.
Okay. The practical piece of it, or nefarious, depending on how you look at it. Good. Others? Anything else? Yeah.
Going back to the jobs, instead of thinking of jobs as an afterthought, after you finish your degree, the jobs begin with internships. So they already have a leg inside the realm of jobs by doing internships.
So instead of having a student finish their education thinking they want to go into a particular career and then discovering that they hate it, you have them figure it out early on, right? Yeah.
So I see it as a collaboration between faculty and counselors, everyone involved, campus-wide, institution-wide, helping the student get to where they need to be. So it starts from entry to progress to completion and then career. So it's everyone's involved with the process.
And that's the kind of, everything we've heard so far, I guess I'm not on the mic.
No, you're-
Everything we've heard so far are very concrete in terms of what pathways might provide or what elements may be essential to creating a pathway. But what you've just said basically encapsulates the principle that underlies it. Collaboration, working together to remove barriers so that students reach their goals. And you mentioned a few specific factors that influence that. So I think we've got a lot of different concrete, both outcome-minded and process-minded elements of pathways, but we're starting to hit on that more abstract, broader 30,000-foot definition there.
There was someone, was one of you.
Oh, I was just going to say, I see it as a framework that encompasses everybody on the campus community, as Lorraine said, to incorporate the 4 pillars of what Guided Pathways is supposed to provide. So
You have a
the
cheat
intake-
sheet.
I
Yeah,
have one little
I
picture. I took it at another in service, but yeah, clarity, intake, support, and learning.
Yeah, we like to ask this question because one of the things that's really important, and we were just talking about this, is if you don't just start embarking on guided pathways, you need to step back and figure out what you're doing and why you're doing it. And coming up with what your own local definition looks like is part of that. So I wanted to share just a couple definitions with you, and these are more that sort of 30,000 foot level. So guided pathways are a set of evidence-based practices that, when implemented together, increase overall successful completion rates and decrease equity gaps. So it's very, very sort of global and about what you're really trying to do, that endpoint ultimately.
And when you're excuse me, and when you're looking at these different definitions, and you're having conversations with people, just as we saw a moment ago, everyone's going to have a different definition of guided pathways that will focus on what they value. And in a definition like this, there are some words in this definition that might trigger something that you value. What might some of those words be? Shout them out.
Evidence-based.
Evidence-based. For some people, I need to know that there's a track record that this is going to work. So part of my definition will state there is evidence, or there will be evidence before we make any decisions. There's another, I think, very important word that we all have talked about at some point or another. Equity. Equity. In many of the events that you've been to as a college, when you go to the institutes sponsored by the foundation and the 20 colleges, we'll hear that Pathways is an equity initiative or an equity movement, not an initiative, it's an equity movement. And I believe, at least locally at my school, that is what's driving a lot of the desire to be involved. So again, pulling from the definition, those things you value, and then as a collective, coming up with the things you value in order to write your own.
I think completion is an important word right now too, as we're looking at the possible new funding formula.
Absolutely.
And not that we don't care about completion anyway, we do. That's the whole goal here, but it's become increasingly more important.
And you know, to take that an even further step, you're actually kind of creating a new mission around Guided Pathways. Because Pathways is intended to encompass so much of what you do now, you're almost creating a little baby mission to go underneath your Big Papa mission.
The word that pops out to me is together.
Very good, very good. And again, that's a value. Doing things, collaborating together, meeting together, getting to know each other maybe in ways you haven't done before. These can be elements or results, outcomes from the Pathways discussions. Can everybody hear me okay? I know I'm not near the mic, so I worry about that.
I can hear you, but the video persons can't hear you. So if you step closer to the mic, that'd be great.
You have to come and we have to stand here and hold hands or something. There was someone back.
Yeah, and I think first on a micro level, it could be redesigning curriculum within your department to make those pathways clearer. Then you can go out to the rest of the department, share that information, and then find where those links are to make the macro pathways.
And what's more important to faculty than the curriculum and the learning that takes place around that? So having that be a part of your definition might be something that you value.
So let's look at some other definitions. And we will provide you all with this entire PowerPoint for those people who like it. I always shudder when people are like taking out their phone and taking pictures. I'm like, you're never going to look at it, admit it. So, Guided Pathways Reform is a student-centered approach that can dramatically increase the number of students earning community college credentials while closing equity gaps. Rather than work with a subset of students, Guided Pathways are a college-wide undertaking that provides a framework for integrating California-based initiatives such as SSSP, equity, basic skills transformation, the Strong Workforce Program, and the California College Promise. So this is sort of that idea of the framework idea of a way to bring together all these different things that we are doing and make them into a cohesive whole. And to really move towards, instead of helping select groups of students, to helping all of our students in the way we traditionally have focused on particular groups of students.
But I also think we can give a hat tip to the comment that was made a moment ago. Is this about funding models? Is this about the amount of money that's being spent? When I look at that, I also read between the lines and say, and I've heard this, we've spent a lot of money and haven't seen a lot of results for that money. Right? So now we need to do something more drastic, more integrated. So I think it's fine to have that kind of jaundice, or not, maybe that's the wrong word, skeptical, or at least aware notion that there are other things at work here, but that doesn't stop us from doing some good work, I think.
Just with regards to Guided Pathways, I mean, it is an initiative, a program, a movement that has a lot of potential to assist students. There is also significant risks to the students, to the community college mission, rewriting the mission. There are risks involved as well. And rather than just looking at it and shaking pom-poms and saying this is the most wonderful thing in the world, we need to look at it very carefully.
Absolutely, absolutely. And having those alternative opinions about even why we're doing this is important to making sure that the changes are long-term and sustainable.
And having those hard conversations, surfacing those concerns is really critical to having the sort of will of the institution to move this forward, as opposed to having a few people who have the pom-poms and have the buy-in, and then there's other people that are sort of left behind. You don't want that to happen. Okay. I have one more, maybe two. So the Guided Pathways framework creates a highly structured approach to student success that provides all students with a set of clear course-taking patterns that promotes better enrollment decisions and prepares students for future success, and integrates support services in ways that make it easier for students to get the help they need during every step of the community college experience. So it's about making the traditional academic pathway clear, but also providing the support services to get them along that pathway.
And the word that sticks out in my mind up here is actually not an underlined word, the word decisions. In this particular example of a definition, there is a value placed around students having decisions to make. Because there's a lot of concern among faculty that guided pathways will undermine or even completely throw out the idea of education as exploration. But this particular definition puts out there students still have decisions to make, but they're informed decisions. And they're decisions that come with more information, or you should say even clearer information, better communicated information than what we've traditionally been able to provide.
When you guys were in school, did you change your major a bunch of times? No? I got a bunch of people, yeah, I've got yeses and nos. All right, those of you who changed your major, did you change your major but do it in a knowledgeable way as to whether or not it would impact the time to your degree? Or did you just hang out and take as long as it took? I see a little bit of both, a little bit of both. I like mentally changed my major on a monthly basis and figured out what will happen if I go that way. Will I be here longer? If I go that way, will I get out of here more quickly? Our students need to be making informed choices. There's lots of conversations about this idea of students taking 15 units. And very often students are taking 12 units and are being encouraged to take 12 units, and no one's telling them if you take 12 units, you're going to be here with us for a long, long time. And so we need to make sure that students are being given all the information that they can in order to make the most informed decisions.
And that actually brings up something that just recently happened to me at my school. We have to ask ourselves, what are our assumptions about our students' abilities? I was giving a presentation to one of my schools, and I mentioned that some numbers about the average completion rates and how many years it takes to complete. And I mentioned we're supposed to be 2-year schools, but it's taking students up to 6 years to graduate. And one of my faculty colleagues said, but that's okay. And we had some deeper dialogue about, well, why is that okay? Is that what they want? Or is that what we've just assumed that they need or are willing to do? So it's all about starting that dialogue and being okay at having that dialogue too, setting aside some assumptions that we may have.
So we already talked about why to define it. You got it. It's about allowing for your own local emphasis so that when you're talking about it, it's clear about what your values are and why you want to do guided pathways. It also facilitates local communication when talking about it. I think it's very, very easy to focus on those concrete aspects of guided pathways and not recognize that idea of transformation and changing how we do business. I know when I first started reading guided pathways, what I saw was something that was talked about in the context of the Student Success Task Force recommendations, but that we never quite got to, and that is really looking at how do we effectively integrate academic affairs, the classroom and what's happening there, with support, with student services, and then also how do we look at what we're actually doing in the classroom and making sure that the way we're teaching and the approaches to teaching are actually the best approaches for our students. So it's an opportunity to step back and look at those pieces that were in the Student Success Task Force recommendations, but they didn't have a way to push us to implement them. It also is about ownership. This is your effort, that you guys are embarking on, that you decide what it looks like, that you decide where you start, and you decide what your priorities are. If any of you have been to, how many of you have been to some of the statewide meetings that have been held around guided pathways? All right, a few of you. So a big part of those meetings is actually sharing the stories of individual colleges so you can see why the colleges that are out in front of everyone else, what they did and how they got there, and actually see that their stories are very different. In California, we guard our individuality very, very, very strongly. And we're very clear that there should be 114 different approaches to this. So it's a matter of figuring out what works for your culture and your needs.
When you think guided pathways, think lowercase g, lowercase p, right? It's what you want it to be. It's not the guided pathways model that will be imposed upon high and the tablets and the stone tablets come down. It's what you want it to be and how you make it so that every definition that we heard earlier can be a component if you want it to be a component. If you feel it's valuable to you, your culture, if it's going to provide benefit for your students, And the risks that we take in doing that, we need to be prepared to study and make sure we're aware of those risks and what the outcomes actually end up being.
So a big point to emphasize is this idea of guided pathways as a framework, and you decide how it's implemented locally. I was presenting it with someone at one of those institutes, and they had created locally like a hangar that was guided pathways, and they had all the different things that were happening on campus sort of hanging off of it, which I think is a good visual for how you can think of it.
And actually, as I was skimming through your work plan, it looks like that's kind of integrated in your work plan already, where you've taken a look at what you're doing already and kind of branched out from that to look down the road to see where could we be with this in 18 months.
So what are guided pathways? And that's big G, big P. We have guided pathways sort of coming at us from different places, and that's why there is a big G, big P, little p. First and foremost, we have the national project, and we have 3 colleges that began with the national project a while back, and then a 4th that came in more recently. So those are amongst the 27 that are a little bit out in front of everybody else. Now we have the 20 colleges that are moving forward, being guided by that national approach, but necessarily being allowed to make their California-style tweaks to that national approach. And now we have the money coming from the Chancellor's office, and all of our colleges are eligible, and all the colleges put in a self-assessment. Took a couple colleges a little bit longer than everybody else, but it's expected that there will be 114 work plans that will come forward. And it's also important to recognize that even before this was the thing to be doing, we have a couple of colleges that had actually looked at their colleges and looked at how things were going and said, we need to do something different, and actually started on guided pathways reform before it became the sort of big thing that you must do that it is today.
I think what's so exciting about that is there was a need identified and the willingness to do something about it. We as members of the 20 are responding to a different stimulus at this point. We're reacting to what we've said we're going to do, and we're dotting all the T's and crossing the I's and getting everything, all the homework done. But there are other colleges that have said, no, this is the right thing to do for students. So it's not that we aren't doing it that way, but our motivations were different in the beginning. But the opportunity is still there to approach it with that same student-centered focus.
You dotted your T's and crossed your I's.
I know, I do that all the time.
It works better. It sounds better. I do that half. So here are all the sort of details around the awards program. It's important to recognize the kind of things that the dollars are supposed to be spent on. Release time to do the work, professional development around the work that needs to be done, administrative time to coordinate it and make it all happen, and then upgrades to technology as needed. So this is one of those things that needs to be worked out locally, or where do those dollars go, and how do you make this all happen? What resources are necessary?
You need someone to answer the phone, for crying out loud.
So you're up. I'll take care.
So for those of you who have had the opportunity to go to the institutes, now's nap time, because you've seen the four pillars quite often. We just wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity to ask questions about what those 4 pillars are that define guided pathways. I think we also look at these not just as the term pillar, because that visual and that concept of pillars may not work for everyone. I like to look at these as values that we embrace as the way we want our colleges to run, so that our students feel like they know what they're doing, like they know where they're going, like they know how well they're doing, and they know that they're not veering away from the path that they've chosen for themselves, whether it's an academic path or it's a career-focused path. Oh, I have to be over here, don't I? I have to get a chain. So clarifying the path is a way of helping students understand what they didn't know when they walked in the door about their own lives. I'm speaking very philosophically, but I'm an English teacher. I guess I can cheat and do that, right? But it does provide them with further exploration into where they want to go and where they want to be than we've traditionally been able to provide. And the reasons why we have not been able to provide that in the way that we would like have a lot to do with resource. It has a lot to do with when we get students in.
But making this component a key element of guided pathways is crucial so that students have a better sense of who they are and what it is that they feel they can do based on a very clear understanding of what we're offering them and why they think that this would be the right thing for them. Establishing those pathways, establishing the very clear semester by semester progress that they would take through the planning and mapping and so on, that you've mentioned some in your work plan. This is one of those values that we would say we would like to think we've been doing it well all along, but with our counselor to student ratio, with our ability to sometimes meet students where they are in terms of technology, these are things that we've struggled with. And hopefully by establishing some of our actions along this pathway, along this particular value, we can see some different outcomes. And if at some point you want to dig a little deeper into this, please feel free to throw your hand up. Again, it's just intended to be kind of an overview. Entering the path, helping students to enter the path at the appropriate place has everything to do with assessment. It has everything to do with knowing the student and their ability based on the curriculum that you've designed. Your developmental education programs, helping students determine what are the right places for them to start. Different kinds of on-ramping scenarios that you might develop in order to bring students in at places where they feel comfortable, where they feel like they can succeed, where they might be challenged, but not challenged in such a way that they become despondent or alienated from the process. And designing your pathways so that those particular milestones are very thoughtful, and the faculty have talked about what that means. Contextualizing is something that I just had a conversation with some of our allied health faculty about. They want a version of our English 1A course for allied health. And we said, sure, why not? That makes sense in a pathway world because it is an experience that is tailored to a student's needs and helps bring them in at a place where they're going to understand and feel comfortable. The notion of working more closely with K-12 so that we are partnering to establish the right spot for students to get involved in whatever developmental education or whatever transfer level work they're going to do in their English, math, and reading. These are conversations that I know Long Beach has a history of working very closely with your locals, but there's more opportunity here to expand some of the work you've done with the Promise and other programs. And AB 705, this one reeks AB 705, right? Helping students understand where they need to start, and now we have the additional step of being compliant with AB 705. So advising, counseling, working with students to help them understand where the potential pitfalls are for falling out of their pathway. These are the kinds of wish we could do things sometimes to offer a more intrusive counseling experience for our students. I do know that the word advising sometimes wrinkles counselors a little bit. Our counseling faculty may see that word and say, well, wait a minute, counseling and advising are two very different things. And that's okay to have that conversation about what it means to be an advisor, vice a counselor, and determine what your culture feels comfortable doing. But the important thing is that our student services are going beyond here's what we have, please come and take advantage of it, to a more intrusive, more proactive, let's do a little bit more to find out what our students need by going to them. And there are ways that technology might be useful in this way. I noticed in your work plan you're talking about Starfish. Is that something you already have, or you're talking about expanding the use of it? That could be a potential, right? The use of technology to help support this particular value. And then embedded in academic and non-academic support services, tutoring, supplemental instruction perhaps, these different kinds of programs that have been done in other places that might be of use for you to help students stay into the pathways that they've designed. Any questions at this point?
Library too.
Oh, of course, yeah, of course. Library services, thank you, Mr. Librarian. Definitely all of the services, and that's another, to emphasize, we do a lot of stuff already. It's just how do we make it clear to our students that this is available, or even go to where they live and tell them this is available and this is how that can help them. the notion of a case management approach to student services exists within this particular value. That every employee of the college who has an impact on that student's experience would be able, through technology or some other mechanism, to confer with each other. So that the student's English teacher and their math teacher and their psychology teacher, whomever, they would have an opportunity to share their experiences, all in the name of helping that student. Question? Sure.
Actually, with regards to this, and please, I'm not trying to pick on you, honestly, but with so many things can happen in a student's life that they start down a particular path, and perhaps I'm not understanding what exactly the path is, but that they start down a particular path, life event happens, and part of, to my mind, part of the informed decision would be changing the major, changing the path.
Good.
And yet the statement, stay on the path, seems to have an agenda of don't change.
Right, it seems to be A to
Tracking.
Yeah, track point A to Z and do not vary, do not deviate. But we know that's not the full reality for every student. That's not the reality for every student. There will be life changes. There will be, they're going to change their minds. The idea is that if you create a pathway that has both focus and flexibility in the first couple of semesters, that student changing their mind could still keep them from deviating far from that path. So staying on the path is all about the design of the program that you create, as well as the interventions that we might provide for students when life happens to them. And it is a philosophical conversation as well, to maybe take it even a step further out from what you've just said. What is the role of the college in intervening when life happens? You know, is it the college's role to be aware if a student has food insecurities or housing insecurities, right? A lot of colleges have stepped up and started doing work in that area. Is the college as an agent for social support for our student body, is that a conversation that this college wants to have or maybe already is having? So these are all elements of staying on the path that go outside of just that really prescribed 4-semester grid and into what it means to provide a very comprehensive student support approach. I hope that speaks to the question.
So,
I know very little about guided pathways. So, but my question is, many of our students work full-time. So is there a part-time path for part-time students?
Well, and that's one of the things that as you're implementing this, you need to think about. I mean, there are part-time students, there are students that are only going to come at night, there are students who are almost exclusively online. Have you actually structured your curriculum so that all of those students can get done? I mean, that's a big question to step back and ask. If you have that capstone course for a particular program that is never offered in the night and you have a bunch of students who are trying to take that course, to finish that program in the night, you need to figure out how you meet those needs. So part of it's stepping back and saying, what do our students need? What different types of students do we have? And how do we meet their needs? Not all of our students are going to be those students who can actually do 15 units a term. That's the reality of it. Or they may have to get to 15 units a term by doing summer or by doing intersession. You have to recognize all those different things. And to your point, I was thinking about a Senate president who, after reading about all of this, was burdened with incredible guilt because she felt that for one of her sons, she provided guided pathways for him as he made his academic decisions. When he wanted to try something out, she's like, yeah, try that out, but make sure you keep on doing this. And so she sort of gently guided him so that he was able to do the exploration that he wanted to do. But at the end, he got to a degree and he actually wound up doing, she was steering him towards English, another English faculty member. But she was guiding him so that he could try out those different things, but not be falling behind with respect to his goal. Whereas our other son just let him do whatever he wanted, and no one was really telling him what to do, and so it took him a long time, and he went off course. So it's about structuring decisions, structuring the options, or making sure those decisions are informed, not saying this is what you have to do or else. And I know it can sound like that. I think there are lots of ways when people are talking about this that they make it sound very rigid. We're going to stick you in this box. It's you're a rat. You're going to go down the maze. You make this turn, then you're stuck going that way. You can't go back. That's not it at all.
And that's why when developing your program mapping process, you might consider alternative types of maps to the 4-semester grid based on the type of student you want to provide guidance for. We are creating our program map process right now, and we are developing maps for full-time, part-time, and evening students, because mapping that out and providing them that informed choice will show them that if you do it this way, it will take you this length of time. And then they can decide which way is going to work for them, because maybe they do have some choice as to whether they come full-time or not. We know that many of our students have other obligations, but at least showing them what the difference would be. And it's about curriculum design, but it's also about schedule design. As Michelle was pointing out, we can create all the maps in the world, but if we don't follow our own maps and offer the courses that students need and the numbers of sections that they need, then we're selling them a bum set of goods, right? A bum steer. Is that the right analogy? No. That would work in Texas, but not here.
To go back to what Bob was saying, I'm not the subject expert in this area. Somebody can whack me if I go off the track. But I just finished a review for radio and television program. And what was so illuminating for me was the fact that they do have introductory core courses. And one of the introductory courses has embedded in it career choices. But it embraces a very broad framework and umbrella, and from broadcasting to television to film, all the courses, streams of it are embedded in it, so that we can see the proclivity of the student where their natural talent lies, and they could pick that stream. Even when they go off track, if they're chosen, for instance, television, and they find that they're not so photogenic in front of the camera or something like that, they prefer to be behind the camera, or if they feel that they have very good writing capabilities, then that field is closely related to journalism, and that is also in the program review. It's mentioned that how the students that they cater to are not in straight jackets, but they can branch out to related fields. So in that way, I see the guided pathways as not really sticking a person in one track, but giving the options of other tracks that may be related to it, at the same time not going totally off the rails.
And if you've thoughtfully designed your program map to provide some overlap in those first couple of semesters, then students can make those transitions and still not lose or not expand their time to degree significantly. But it is reality that it is going to happen.
Well, and the other piece is that generally in your career technical education areas, you generally already do have pathways there, and you often have smaller cohorts, so you're actually providing them levels of guidance that your traditional, not actually that's the wrong word, your students in other areas are that they don't have that benefit. So in CTE areas, you often already have pathways in place, and so it's just a matter of potentially refining them, even if that's might not even be needed.
Student athlete programs, another great example. If we could take some of the underlying values that are put to work in the student athlete programs and expand them and scale them and put them in the majority of our students, then we could see some of the completion that they enjoy. And the final value then, just to wrap this part up, the final value is about assessment. And this largely has morphed throughout the system as we talk about the final pillar or the final value, ensuring learning. It tends to focus on student learning outcomes. And when I looked into your work plan and I saw the final 3 components of your work plan are focusing on learning outcomes, that tells me you get it. You get it. Part of making sure that the pathways are working is that the outcomes and what you want students to actually learn while they're with you are actually going to be measured. They're going to be used as part of clarifying the path, as part of all the other pillars that are there for you. And assessment to me is a dialogue with students. That's the way I look at assessment. And I learn from the assessment either in a micro way by assessing the knowledge they have, but I can also use outcomes and other mechanisms to assess how well they feel they're ready to move into the next phase of whatever their goals are, whether they be strictly academic or career focused, or I should say CTE focused, or the right way to say that. Those are the 4 pathways or the 4 values, the 4 pillars. Another visual that you can use, and I'm going to ask Michelle to talk about this, but this is something that I think our Senate President has talked about quite a bit, because pillars seem so rigid, so siloed, really, when you think about how they are. But in fact, this is a nested approach where each element is touching and supportive and integrated with the other.
Yeah, I think you captured it. I mean, I think thinking of those as four distinct and different things is kind of an artificial division, whereas they really all work together. And a great example is that within a course, allowing for that exploration and keeping the student on path by allowing for that exploration early on and helping them to make the choices that they need to make.
Right. And the concrete things that are going on now, all of them could fit into these different circles. The things that you're doing. However, because those conversations aren't happening as readily with the people who are doing them in different parts of the campus, then we might be losing an opportunity to be really effective in getting the results that we want.
All right. So what are you doing well? One of the things that's really important to stress is that even if you have not formally said we are doing guided pathways, you may have already begun doing things that are consistent with what Guided Pathways is all about. I think it's very, very rare that any of our colleges would look at the types of things that are supposed to happen within the Guided Pathways framework and go, heck, we've not done any of that. And you guys, we know you have the Long Beach Promise and all of that. What have you already done? Where are you ahead of the game with respect to implementing Guided Pathways? No one had enough cheesecake. They had too much. What are you guys doing that you're proud of here? Yeah.
We have made curriculum changes to our courses where we've created in math, reading, and English accelerated situations for students, and we started that before formally becoming part of Guided Pathways, and as we are formally part of Guided Pathways too. So taking a look at our curriculum
And seeing how you can help students get through more efficiently. Others? That's somebody calling it. They've got the answer. Yeah.
I was saying, so the enrollment management plan and scheduling those low frequency classes deliberately, and those efforts to make sure students have access to the classes they need.
So you're already doing some of it as far as making sure that those courses are being offered on a regular basis.
And you can teach the rest of us how to do that? Yeah, great, thank you.
Got a job.
Yes.
Yeah. We have a set of teams in place so that as the conversations continue related to Guided Pathways, there are teams that have a cross-section of campus members, faculty, staff, and administrators to help implement certain aspects. For example, there's a Pathways group and a tech group, all under the umbrella of Guided Pathways, and some other groups as well.
So you've already developed a structure for moving forward with Guided Pathways that has multiple cross-functional teams to handle different aspects?
Right, sort of a way to make sure that the appropriate people can participate in conversations and vet certain ideas that we have.
Yeah.
We're looking at the data to see what students who have 45 or 60 units and try to see what they need to complete. And we are calling them, we're putting classes in the schedule to meet those needs, to some success, I would say.
Are you finding that there's holes in your offerings that you need to fill that can help those students?
Yes, and some of those things we can do things about.
Right.
Other things like some of the science labs, I know Paul is here, we really can't. Because we're really impacted and, some of the lab classes. But other than that, yes, we can put things in, and we are.
That's great. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
To add on to that effort, we are doing it in a very focused way and really reaching out only to our disproportionately impacted students. So we tie things together that way.
Has anyone ever tried to register for classes at your college? I went through, actually, was it you guys? I started to pretend to be a student at one of the colleges and discovered in the CCC Apply, you can be homeless, but you have to provide 2 different telephone numbers. There's a problem there, like sensitive to homelessness, but not to the fact that a person might not have 2 phones.
Pierre is not here. Guided Pathways hums beyond the corridor of the college. This is an old dog, you can't teach new tricks. I take the public transportation. Every time the bus turns and comes closer to my home, you see this big billboard, and it's fascinating. I mean, you can see it from every angle, and it says hands-on experience for culinary arts. And I think right there we see the guided pathways, connecting it to students, connecting it to draw them like a magnet to college and say, here we are, we can do it for you.
So I would just throw out there that Jorge's doing something by me, but I would just throw out there that all of the things that you've just described began with a question. They began with, why is this way? And you gave yourselves an opportunity for an inquiry process where you came together, created an infrastructure, you defined the question and said, what is it that we want it to look like? And then came up with the actions and steps to make that change. That is what this is really all about. It's simply providing us with the incentives, for better or for worse, whatever those incentives may be, but incentives to ask those kinds of questions of ourselves and then give ourselves the opportunity to try something new, give ourselves the ability and it's okay to make a mistake and then fix it as we go. And with that kind of spirit of redesign that I've heard in several of those things you mentioned, that spirit of, if we could do this from the ground up, what would it look like? That is what should influence or guide your steps in your work plan, as you reassess your work plan, as you develop new tasks in your work plan. It's really a great opportunity to design this place the way you want it to look.
And if I I just wanted to add, we do have it in our strategic plan, so that was a really good work by the previous president where they foresaw what it was coming. And so the fact that it's in our strategic plan, I think we're one of the few colleges that have it, that was been approved by the board, so we know that we have our administrators that are in support of all this. So the work on the strategic plan.
And I think we're going to talk about the role of faculty in more explicit terms in a few minutes. But if you've got the administrative support and that support is willing to allow faculty the time and the primacy, the autonomy that they need to have these conversations and to conduct this inquiry, you could really go far. You really could.
Well, and this conversation, looking at the problem solving that you've already done, that's what it's all about. It's about getting rid of those barriers, and that's not threatening. That's figuring out how to best serve your students. And so it's important that you have an opportunity to get deep into the dialogue about what you are doing and what you can do and what you should do, as opposed to sort of getting stuck on some of the more structured things that you're expected to do in the name of guided pathways, right, mapping, and so forth.
And that's why this is not a cheerleading session for capital G, capital P. We're not pom-pomming. We're cheerleading your lowercase g, your lowercase p, making it what you want it to be.
You have to get sweaters or something. Oh, this is yours.
Oh, this is me? It is me? This is me.
Yeah, here.
Oh, that roll.
You
So,
like this one. It annoys me.
This is an annoying slide, yes, but you've seen these things before. It also takes forever, so I have to tap dance a little bit and talk about it while it comes up. Which one of these makes you go, yeah, I'm so glad we did that? Which one makes you twitch with a kind of, ugh, why did we do that? All of these things are within our system. They're initiatives that have hit us in different ways over the years. I think it was only recently that, I forget which chancellor's office person it was, who said they had never heard the term initiative fatigue until recently. Well, we've been living and breathing and eating that term for quite some time. But I'm sure you see something up there that at some point in your role at the college you've touched on. So what that means is, I think there's another one. Yeah, that one. The California Guided Pathways Project, see a little tiny one that just popped up there, that's the 20. That's the logo for the foundation and for this project. That's who all of us are involved in. All of these initiatives actually can be categorized into these 4 values areas. And this is just one demonstration of how you might do that. And the point of this is to illustrate that the work you're doing already has these same value components as we find in these pillars or in these value areas. The notions of equity, social mobility, economic health, all of these are embedded in the purpose for all these initiatives, but when you put these into the different areas and the values, then you start to coalesce, then you can begin to create some kind of a planning approach to how you talk about guided pathways. Because in all of the information that you've seen as one of the 20, the first couple of years of guided pathways is talking about guided pathways, helping people understand what they are. I guess I gotta do that.
Yeah.
Helping people understand what they are, why it doesn't have to be something that is intimidating or alienating. Thank you. Why it can be something that simply builds upon the good work you've already done with changes that can break down the siloed experiences that we have going on with these. The Chancellor's Office has done some of that work by calling for the integration of SSSP, BSI, equity money. So they're kind of helping us, nudging us in toward thinking of these initiatives in this way. But again, every one of our 114 colleges has a different take on every single one of these things and how it's been useful or been twitch-inducing at your college. But now thinking about it in terms of lower G, little p, might be a helpful way to have a conversation. Oh, and then there's that one. And assessing competencies.
Beginning and the end. Yeah.
There we go. And there's so much. So why?
So why guided pathways? I mentioned that idea of figuring out why guided pathways make sense for you. And some of the colleges that did start early on, they looked at what was happening and they looked at their numbers and they weren't happy. Have you spent any time looking at your student data, looking at where you're at as a whole, like the Senate as a whole? How many of you have seen your KPIs?
Your key performance indicators.
See, if they've seen them, they know their KPIs.
Oh, you're right. That was a test. That was a test. Sorry.
So key performance indicators are one of those ways of looking at what you're doing, and there are people, I'm sure, who have, because that's one of the things that the California 20 have done. And looking at those numbers is really important because you can see where you're at and see if you're comfortable, if you're happy with the things that are going on at your college, like it taking 6 years and so forth. Why guided pathways? We already talked about the funding. You saw equity is all over it, and equity really is an integral a part of it. One of the pieces of literature around guided pathways that resonated so strongly with me was a study that found that you have students who come into a college with the same SAT score, and then whether or not they succeed is most highly correlated with their socioeconomic status. In other words, students come in, same SAT scores, able to do the same on those annoying tests, but basically the background that they came from determines whether or not they succeed in college. It's correlated with that, suggesting that somehow we're not keeping the opportunities equal for them once they come into the colleges.
And I think the challenge for us as faculty administrators, whatever role we play, is to hear what Michelle just said, that socioeconomic status and those external factors we were talking about earlier are one of the most relevant indicator, and actually saying, well, maybe there is something we can do about that, because our initial reaction typically is, well, what can we do about that? We can't babysit for them. We can't provide money so they don't have to work. We can't bring them to school every day. But what is it that we can do? And asking that question and not stopping until we have an answer to that question. That's the equity part that guided pathways might encourage us to dive into. And instead of what you've probably heard, those of you who've been to the institutes, the phrase student deficient model or student deficiency model, the notion that because the student can't do this, then it's their fault that they're not succeeding. When all that guided pathways might inspire you to do is say, well, the student can't do this, what is it that I can do about it?
So I mentioned that need for that local why and how, and that really important need of making the case locally for your college, for the people around the table that you need to communicate with, and how you make the case with different audiences is likely to vary. The facts that resonate with one group may not resonate with another, and then you may have even individuals that need to hear different types of information.
Are there math faculty here? Math faculty? If anybody starts showing you data of guided pathways, be gentle with them.
So I wanted to share one college that was one of the early starters, and that was Cabrillo. And they initially brought in consultants to sort of help them with their guided pathways work. And they sort of started by having a lot of conversation across the college, talking about what was going on. And they began by looking at their data and looking at the experiences of their students as a way to figure out what they could do differently, how they could better serve their students. Have you all done any focus groups with students yet? Okay, you have done some. That is such a powerful, powerful thing. We spend a lot of time making assumptions about what our students want and need and what our students' experiences are. And when you actually talk to them, you may find out that you are very, very wrong. I think we really felt that last week with the college that we were at, where there were lots of assumptions being made about students, but no one had actually talked to the students to make sure that those assumptions that were being made about them were in fact correct.
And that's a sticky thing to say, actually, because as faculty, you interact with students all the time, and you have conversations with students, and those anecdotal conversations can easily turn into our impressions of students as a whole. Through no malintent, that's kind of what happens when we've had these types of interactions. But when we ask these questions outside of the student-faculty dynamic that exists when you're having a conversation with a student during an office hour and allow students to express what those barriers are in a different setting, we can learn a whole lot more about what it is that's truly holding them back. Because remember, when you're sitting down with a student in office hour and they're talking about things going on in their lives, they are still with you, their teacher, who is going to give them a grade or not. So they're in a different power dynamic than they would be if they're sitting around a table with other students talking about the things that make college difficult for them. It's just something as faculty we want to keep in mind.
I'm so glad you brought up the socioeconomic factor. Having come from that kind of a humble background, but this is beyond my pay grade. This is a question for the superintendent, president, and the vice president of the college to really take up. On the one hand, the guided pathway seems like a brilliant idea, but when you are trying to yoke together equity and California College Promise, that promises college for every person, no matter what their color is, what their creed is, what their religion is, and especially if they come from socioeconomic factors that forbids them from having a college experience in the past, or they may be the first generation student who has entered the portals of college. They say that every student who enters any community colleges is transformative for them. They become so different after that experience. But having said all that, the new funding formula is completely at odds with everything that we are trying to achieve over here. I mean, I can understand that closing the equity gap, the time it takes from 6 years, we can accelerate exactly like Dr. Kenna was talking about with English, with communications, we have done that. But then it takes time. It is not going to, Rome was not built in a day. But then there seems to be absolutely no time given. It's all bang, 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 then give me the results, otherwise your money, the funding is going to drop. And if the funding drops, how are we going to integrate this whole thing about basic skills and bringing students up who are not college ready yet? That requires restructuring the curriculum, taking more time beyond the classroom to get them up to speed with college level courses or upper division courses. All that needs time, it needs instructors, it needs the full, a more classified staff, because we classify staff with the backbone of the college. They need to be present in that as well. So it's a team effort. It cannot happen when the funding drops so precipitously.
So we are, I think everyone agrees, we are in an incredibly challenging time between AB 705 and the proposed new funding formula that we hope doesn't happen. I like those adjectives. And then this, right? So if all of this were in place and working the way it should, and we were really had removed all the barriers that we possibly could, and then somebody came in and said, we're introducing this new funding formula, it wouldn't be quite so dramatic. But to be implementing this and having people in our chancellor's office say very clearly that you need to feel free to try things. You need to feel free to try things and have them fail to figure out how best to serve your students, at the same time modifying the funding formula so that you really feel like you can't fail. They are in absolute contradiction, and believe me, the chancellor's office is hearing that from all different angles, and we're hearing it when we're talking to people, because you can't deny it. It's make all these things happen yesterday so that we can handle these new new mandates and forces that are being put upon us, and it's incredibly challenging.
I think that's well said. It's an unprecedented state of transition and challenge in our system. That's why whatever you do with guided pathways, it really needs to be what's going to work for you, so that in the long run it stays and it sticks, because we're going to need it. We're going to need this kind of change in order to meet some of the challenges that are ahead, especially around your developmental education, math, English faculty with 705. It can potentially create a dramatic shift in the way you deliver developmental education.
We're all in it together.
Yes.
Yeah. So Cabrillo started by looking at their data, and they looked at their completion rates within 6 years, overall prepared students, remedial students, and they compared them to to the state value, to their peer groups, and found that they were lacking, and that there was definitely room for improvement. So even their prepared students within 6 years, still taking 68% of them to get to the end. I said that completely backwards. Just read the slide. And then they looked at the completion rates by different populations and saw they definitely had some disparate impact, and realized they really had some things that they wanted to change. Their completion rate for their unprepared students was flat, and really just not satisfactory. And they said to themselves, only 42% of their students complete something after 6 years. And recognized that they were 24 out of 28 overall and 26 out of 28 for remedial students. So they were really, really failing those remedial students. And so they came up with a goal and said we want to change it, and that where they currently were was not acceptable, and that these numbers are what set them on their pathway towards looking at how they could modify things to make things work better for their students.
And just to emphasize, this was a strategy to bring about change. This wasn't just, hey, let's look at some numbers and decide. This was part of a communication strategy to help people understand why we could look at this with a sense of urgency. And that's very much a part of what we've heard at the institutes and those opportunities we've had to meet with other 20 colleges, that there does seem to be this need to create a sense of urgency around taking some steps, a sense of urgency that isn't necessarily tied to the pending changes in the funding formula and other things. But data can potentially be a way of creating that sense that we want to do better. But as Michelle said a moment ago, knowing your audience, some people may not see that these numbers are that warrant the kind of dramatic changes that could come about under a guided pathways framework. It's all about knowing your audience and even asking your audience, what do you need to know in order to see that we should be doing things differently?
It's really, when you start looking at your numbers, it always leads to more questions. Like if this was my college, I'd be like, what happened between 2005, 2006, and now? Why did we have that change? And there might be a logical reason, there might be an illogical reason. We are so subject to the economy and the changes there that can totally change things. But understanding those numbers is the first step with respect to figuring out how to address numbers that you're not happy with. So Cabrillo went on to engage in a bunch of activities to really kick off their work, and really working to get the word out by lots of different mechanisms to make sure that everyone was engaged and everyone was aware. They read the book. You guys know what I mean when we say they read the book? Okay. I was going to bring it just to be...
The Redesigning America's Community Colleges from the Community College Resource Center.
A lot of colleges have done that, like actually had the college reading the book and done regular meetings to talk about the book and so forth. But it really is necessary to look at what you're doing and look at how you're doing and develop that sense of urgency, that realization that you need to do something.
And this might be useful to have a communication plan for how you talk about guided pathways and where you talk about guided pathways and with what frequency and with what tools you talk about guided pathways, just to have a framework around the conversation.
So Cabrillo had a number of different pieces of advice, and I thought they're pretty universal pieces of advice, knowing your college culture, knowing what's going to work and what's not going to work. When you're engaging in activities, actually doing things that bring the participants in as opposed to just listening to information. And I love this one. Never underestimate the capacity for denial of data. So we didn't get into, you guys weren't knee deep in the data, but oftentimes people can look at numbers and somehow say that's not so, or reason it away in a manner that makes it not important and not urgent. It's really important with respect to guided pathways. You are a group of people who chose to be here today, or your senators who had to be here today. There may be other people on your campus who are not paying attention in any way, shape, or form, and ideally you have a way to bring them in. You want to expand leadership as much as possible, get lots of people involved, and you really have to be patient. Yeah, here we need to make all these things happen yesterday, but ultimately, guided pathways isn't something that you implement overnight. There's lots of different pieces, lots of different steps. It's not a linear path. There's different things that you're going to do. You're going to circle back and change things. We have lots of colleges that started doing things one way, recognized that it wasn't working, and turned around and had to change it. Other colleges where they thought they were doing really well by their students and then had student focus groups and realized they were not doing so well. You really have to sort of check in on how you're doing every step of the way in order to move forward in the most positive way possible.
And one thing to think about as well, since for all the people that are in the room, there are different levels of understanding of guided pathways. You have a different role in the work that's been done so far. But now that you have a work plan, now is an opportunity to look through that plan and say, where do I fit as an individual? What are the values that I believe speak to me in terms of what we want to accomplish? And then to the extent you have choice, how can you get involved in that? Right? If this is something that you're starting to sense, and you don't have to buy into the whole thing, but if you see something there that you see as valuable, then getting involved is a beginning to how you become someone who understands guided pathways and becomes a part of making positive solutions and changes.
So I'm curious, since we had more people come in before, I want to find out who's in the room. How many of you are classroom faculty? How many of you are counseling faculty?
Great, awesome.
How many of you are librarians? One. Other faculty groups. Did I miss a faculty group somehow? Okay, deans. Directors? Other administrators? Okay.
Research. Is research here? Yeah, all right. Your best friend, right over there. Become your best friend.
There's classified staff as well.
That's right. Oh, I'm so sorry. Classified staff. Yay, often the first point of contact for our students, critical people.
And if anybody knows the challenges that students have navigating our system and the systems that we've set up, our classified professionals know that very well. And they'll tell you the things that students ask them, which to many faculty may seem, oh, well, of course they know that, when it turns out, well, no, they didn't. There was one story I heard, I forget Cassie, where Cassie's from. One of our classified professionals that's done the IEPI circuit and has been doing guided pathways for some time has had students who don't even know what a unit is. They don't understand how we calculate or the number of units that students take, or not calculation, rather that units are valuable to them. They don't even understand that general point.
So who must be involved in Guided Pathways at your college? And who has been involved here? So it sounds like you guys have a decision-making structure or committees that are overseeing the work that are cross-functional. Who is generally involved in decision at your college, and are the structures in place for implementation of Guided Pathways, or do they need to be developed? It sounds like you guys already have a structure in place.
Do you have an org chart yet? Wouldn't it be nice if you had a Guided Pathways org chart?
You're working on it? Yeah.
Working on an org chart? I mean, that you are designing how people are going to interact with each other in support of students. So while you might have a leadership or a decision-making org chart, it pays to have a Guided Pathways org chart so everybody sees what role they play and how they fit into the 4 principles or whatever way you want to use to organize your structure. You don't have to have 4 pillars. You can have 20 pillars, I guess, if you want. But whatever structure you use based on the values you have that you want to create in this redesign, that could be your organizational structure as well.
We generally don't get into talking so much about faculty talking to faculty, but I think in part because it's just so obvious. The only way it works, particularly the stuff around mapping and meta majors, works if it's your counseling faculty and your teaching faculty working together, and then with appropriate classified who have the right knowledge in the room as well. Otherwise, you're going to be making decisions that just don't make sense. And it's even at some of the institutes, I was in a room and had people at tables mapping out the first 2 years. I had them take 2 different TMCs and see if they could create a first-year experience that would make it so a student could spend their first year and then either go off into social work and human services or off into business. And they had these people working away, and every table at the end, they happened to be no counselors in the room, and they were all like, really needed a counselor. And so this is an opportunity for faculty to faculty dialogue that may not currently happen, and to find out what you each know and how you can work together and support what one another does in a way that maybe you haven't done it before. Guided Pathways is a way to start thinking about how we serve our students and what role we play in talking to our students. There are things that I, as a psychology faculty, information that I have for my students that's part of my background that the counselor can't possibly know all about for all of our different students and all different majors. And the teaching faculty, the classroom faculty can provide that. And there needs to be more purposeful provision of that kind of information so that students understand if you want to do blank, you should be going over here, not over there.
And if this college is like most colleges, and if we're being honest, there might be not the greatest relationship between classroom faculty. Counselors teach, don't they? Right? I'm picking on Michelle. We need better terms.
We need words.
Yeah, we need words so that we can start kind of bringing down some of the artificial barriers that do exist. I actually have gotten to the point where I say counseling faculty and non-counseling faculty. I find some people like that a little better. But the point is we're all faculty, but we've allowed some of these artificial barriers, perceptions, misperceptions, get in the way of some of the really important conversations. And certainly the culture here could be very different. It might be right in line with what some other colleges have experienced. I cannot stress the benefit of happy hour enough. Opportunities for people to be people with each other and not personas, professional personas, that can get in the way of what our collective goal is, which is to help students.
So we wanted to share just a couple of structures that other colleges had developed, but it sounds like you have one that's already out there. But Skyline is a noteworthy college because they actually started with a very top-down structure and realized that was not working, and then they had to sort of start over, reboot. And they came up with this structure where they have the sort of overarching design team, and then underneath that they have their inquiry teams that have individuals that connect back up to the design team, but then each has their own particular function. And it sounds like you guys might have something similar in your approach. This is the one college where you can quickly find it on their website, and it just looks really good because it incorporates lots of different voices. and they have their different inquiry teams that each has a specific function, and teams of people that are working there that then feed back to that Uber committee. Another college that reportedly has a good structure, oh, that was cool, is College of the Canyons. I was talking about a concern that I had at my college, that it seemed like we had these people who were going to the institutes, and then they talk about what should happen, and then they report out to the rest of the campus, and I'm like shuddering, like, no, you need to embrace everybody. You need to bring everybody up to speed with you, not just have these quiet conversations and then share ideas and think that you have done your due diligence as far as involving others in the decision making. And I'm standing there talking to someone, and she starts writing stuff down on a piece of paper, and then she looks up to me and she says, we have 130 positions for having people involved in guided pathways. And that was College of the Canyons. I haven't double checked the math here, but basically what you have is a structure that allows for lots and lots of participation. As with most colleges, I'm pretty sure that they have that issue here where you have 80% of the people don't do anything and then 20% do most everything, or whatever that ratio is. So some of those members may be duplicated, but what you do have though is a structure that really provides voice for lots of different faculty and other campus constituencies to play a role in the decision-making process. So we're looking forward to you guys, your org chart, see how that looks. So we mentioned students, and that students are absolutely important. Why is student participation critical? It's like such a no-duh. Why? It's for them, right? Who are we trying to help? It's for our students. And when should students be engaged? All the time, immediately, ongoing. I love the story that I heard from one person where, we wanted to see how we're doing, and so we thought we would start off by asking the students that we thought we were serving well, and did a focus group with those students who they thought they were serving well, students who were coming for tutoring or coming for some kind of support services, and discovering that they weren't serving them anywhere near as well as they thought. And so it's really, really important to have to ask those questions. I pulled this up. One of the things, do you know where this comes from? Where does it come from? Yeah, it's from CCC Apply. You go into CCC Apply and you are given pages and pages of pages to select from. And I bet if you go in and look at what you guys have in yours, you'll discover that you have things that don't even exist anymore. There's things that we can do to simply make completing that application easier. Well, I'm going to hand it over to Randy to talk about faculty, but just like faculty have the 10+1 that are the areas where faculty have primary responsibility, it is in regulation that students are supposed to have a voice with respect to decisions that affect them. So it's not just the right thing to do and a necessary thing to do, bringing those students in. It's in regulation that students are supposed to be involved in that decision making that ultimately impacts them.
And I would throw into that, while your student government, student leadership, whatever it's called here, is a useful resource, often those students are very high-performing students who were very directed when they came in, and they don't represent the student who doesn't have some of that direction or motivation. So having them be involved as a matter of your process, your shared planning process, your decision-making process is important. But bringing in students who can give that different experience, the perspective from that different experience, is really crucial as well.
Yeah, and you want to talk to your STEM students in one area, your basic skills students separately. You don't want to have a situation where students might be intimidated by other students in the room. And I think that getting away from your student government is so important. I was just in a conversation where we have problems with students not understanding the message when they're about to be offered a seat in a class. They're at the top of the wait list. And there was this message put out, we're going to say this, and someone asked, was this shared with students? And like, yeah, well, we shared it with the student government. We're like, but they're the students who figured it out. They're not the ones who fell off the wait list and didn't understand the message when it came to them, right? You need to find the students who wound up not getting the classes that they needed.
It can't be understated how the focus groups and the conversations with students, how important that is, not just for helping you establish the principles and the ways you want to redesign, but also to make the case to others why these things need to be done, because the student voices are probably far more powerful than us talking to you for a couple of hours or any paid consultant coming in from somewhere. But when your own students tell you, yeah, this is a problem, well, I mean, to me, that's almost like my kid telling me there's a problem, and I need to do something about that. And the 10+1, so to consider implementing guided pathways, whatever framework it is that you're developing without faculty involvement, not that anybody here is thinking of that, but to do that without faculty involvement is to not create sustainability, it's to not create the type of framework that is going to serve your students the way that the faculty know the students. So all of these elements of the 10+1 that are found in Title V are found in guided pathways. The curriculum, it's you're clarifying your path and where students enter the path, your degree certificate requirements, your policies, your program development, all of these things are crucial, and the faculty purview in these areas is established. And your planning process, it's established in your curriculum committee and your Senate, and the purviews that those committees have, all of that is established. To deviate from your established shared planning process in order to create or implement guided pathways could lead you to outcomes and repercussions and things that you don't want to happen down the road. In other words, stepping out of that process could mean later on you don't have sustainable structure, because there will always be, but we didn't create it in a way that was collaborative, that feeling or that thought that we haven't really gone through a grassroots, ground up approach to creating this framework. And all the different, when we get into the later areas of the 10+1, often these are the areas that are more mutually agreed upon, the different processes for program review and professional development. I noticed in your work plan, professional development is called out. Bravo, that's a great idea. Not just, I mean, although it is focused on ensuring students are learning, I believe it was, maybe I'm mixing that with the outcomes, but every component of the 4 values can lend themselves to more professional development, more understanding of how we do these things for our students, and also hearing from the students as well. And you could take the 10+1 areas and divide them up into the 4 values areas and see where that connection exists. Again, how you do it here locally and what the faculty at large, their involvement in these areas, how that pans out locally, you'll know best, and you'll know how to play on those strengths and to continue to build on the relationships and the structure you already have. But it's all right there. These are things that faculty do already that are components of these different principles of pathways. Taking pictures. Sure. Pictures. Right, and again, just continuing on how the different governance structures related to faculty roles are crucial to making these decisions about guided pathways. Your Senate just approved the work plan. I will out my college by saying the Senate hasn't seen the work plan. We're on spring break next week, and it's due Friday, right, or Thursday, right? I wouldn't say that's a success right out the gate. And we've talked about what that means and how to bounce back from that. But pat yourselves on the back, right? The fact that this is happening so fast and you're being responsive to it, I believe tells me, I would imagine tells Michelle, that you understand faculty have a very significant role to play here. And it doesn't seem like you're shying away from that at all. And there may be questions, there may be concerns over the risks that are involved. But Long Beach has never been one to shy away from trying new things. So I think you guys will be giving the presentation next time. Right?
I think one of the things that that's fresh in my mind, a survey was done of all the colleges to see how they were doing with respect to guided pathways. It was done by the task force, the Guided Pathways Task Force that Randy is on. And I was going through and looking to see what concerns, what faculty said we need help with. And one of the big one was just help with defining guided pathways, that sort of basic thing. But I think, pretty sure number 2 was having a, number 2 or number 3, I always fudge the numbers sometimes. You know, I'm the type of person, I kind of remember the big picture, not the details. So, yeah. anyways, but what a big thing was that a lot of the colleges were wanting to have clarification of what it meant for something to be faculty led. And I think with Guided Pathways, it's very obvious it has to be faculty. It has to be faculty driving it. But what does it mean, and how do you create structures so that it is faculty led? And I worry when someone says, well, tell me, what does faculty led mean? Does that mean that they're feeling like they're not leading, or they're being led, or they're telling where to go and they're standing in front, but they're not actually making the decisions?
I would even proffer a potential response to that question. When something is faculty led, those areas where faculty have primacy and purview are what drive the conversation. Curriculum, pedagogy, student need, these are the things that faculty do on a daily basis. These are what we address on a daily basis. This is what we think about. This is our area of expertise in how we communicate and interact with students. Let that be what drives the conversations around how to redesign the college. That's the way I look at faculty-led. To think about it more concretely, faculty-led means your faculty have the time to do this. Your faculty have the opportunity and the resources that they need to work with our administrative colleagues, classified professionals, to make progress on these values and goals that we establish for ourselves. And that if your administration is supportive, and it sounds like your administration, they've integrated this into strategic planning. The work plan looks far more comprehensive than any work plan I've seen to date. It sounds like you have some support. Now is the time to have that happy hour. Make sure everybody is not only doing it on paper, but doing it at that one-to-one personal level as well.
Yeah.
So my question, we may be answering it later in the conversation, but what is that thing that we're doing? What is a list of to-dos that each of us can sort of take with us, hammer it out, and bring back to the group?
Remember that 114 different ways of doing things? That's the tricky. So you guys are, well, it sounds like you're further along. The last group we talked to were like, oh, you need to figure out who's in charge, because they didn't have the Guided Pathways point person. They didn't have that yet. And you need to figure out what your why is. I mean, I think it's not linear, and in big conversations about how do we support colleges with respect to Guided Pathways, that's a big part of the conversation. It is not here's the 10 things that you have to do, you do this first, then this. It's nebulous. You need to figure it out, and part of the reason is we're not all starting at the same point. You guys have things in place. You know, I don't know, it's so weird. It's like your college knew some of this was going to happen. I don't know. It's very suspicious. So you guys are a little different in that way. So there's not, I mean, I think the most important starting point, the logical starting point that you have to have is you have to understand your why. You have to have that that belief that you need to make change because something's not right that you need to address. And that's sort of step one, and then you transition into the how and recognize all the things that you've already done.
And right behind that, 3 words: Guided Pathways Picnic, right? Get everybody together and start talking about the why, and help people understand why why we do this case that we're making for making change is meaningful to them.
Your data person snuck out. That's the person.
That's the person with the magic keys.
So, and yeah, this is basically what we just said, because that's sort of the big take-home message. You need to you need to find that why, which sounds so, I don't know.
And you can go to other colleges and you can look at what their tangible steps were, and maybe there'll be an inspiration there. Maybe there'll be ideas that you can then evolve into what works for you. Again, you have a work plan already, and when you dig through that work plan, something will scream to you, oh, that's my area, or that's something I care about. And if nothing does, then you go and say, well, how do we get into the work plan down the road, something that I can get involved with that supports Guided Pathways, and how to expand and evolve it that way.
I have a question about, or would like some input. A little bit larger issue as far as with the Guided Pathways trying to get students into the 2-year pathway to make things more efficient. And that part of that is assessment issues and then also remedial issues and how long this will actually take for them. And coming from the performing arts area, it's always been a challenge to think that, well, we don't get remediation per se. That's for math, it's for English, it's for reading, it's these other areas that are all cognitive based. And yet there's a lot of disciplines within the college and every college that are skill based that aren't allowed to have remediation. And I'm not just talking about the arts. So when music or dance, you obviously have, it's a physical skill, and then it has to occur in time. There are a lot of areas that do that. A nurse putting in an IV is a physical skill that has to happen in a certain amount of time to get a cranky patient. An auto mechanic, it's a physical skill, and it has to happen in a certain amount of time if they're going to keep their job. And yet, there's no remediation allowed or set up for those types of skill-based disciplines, and yet we're still supposed to get them ready for an audition at a university of some sort, or ready for different types of skill-based things. So I'm wondering if there's some other way I can think about this or approach this in that bigger problem.
Well, in light of AB 705, we don't have remediation for anything now. So that sort of changes that. That's just a point. That just sort of changes that whole dialogue, right? I mean, yeah, makes your head want to explode. But just because you're being asked to find a way to get students out in 2 years, it doesn't mean they're all going to get out in 2 years, right? You're creating that pathway, and again, it's not the tracking the students and this is what you do, and if you don't do this, you're off the path, and we're not going to, we're going to let you fall in the water, and we're not going to pull you out. So, yeah, I don't know.
I could say something at the risk of not fully understanding. I look at this as an opportunity for creativity. Within our program, within the courses that we offer, the skills that we embed in our skill-based courses, contextualization of basic skills, contextualization of cognitive into skill-based classes is something we've talked about for a while. There could be opportunities to do that here as a way to ensure that students move through in that timely manner. If the issue is the skills that my students require just can't be done in that 2 years, then if we want to try and do the guided pathways approach and make sure we're at least providing one route that lands within 2 years, we get more creative with the curriculum, as well as the teaching the methodologies that we use, and the support from our administration to support students in that more accelerated pathway in whatever that skill-based discipline might be, auto mechanics or theater arts or what have you. But that's just one pathway, and then you have other ways to do it. So I hope I'm not misunderstanding, but again, being creative around the curriculum could be ways to do it, but keeping in mind that not one size fits all, and we have lots of different types of students.
Right, and maybe what I'm getting to also is to be encouraged in this discussion, to be upfront and honest with the students, that we're going to assess you when you come in. So they have to audition into our program, and to let them know, for some of you, this is not a 2-year program. In fact, it's likely for a lot of you, it's going to be a 3-year program, or whatever that takes. And to not have that either looked down on or said, well, no, we don't really want to encourage that or something. We got to be careful about that. But at the same time, I think it's almost there's an ethical component that says, we need to give them some very realistic ideas of where they are and what it's going to take to get there. So I don't know if that's come up in other areas.
At the same time that you're having that conversation with the students, however, are the faculty also asking themselves, well, why do I need to say this? Why do I need to tell a student that realistically this is going to take you 3 years, and have I done everything I can to ensure that the educational offering we have for them can be done within a 2-year period? Do you follow what I mean there?
I do, but I mean, if you...
And that's a hard question of us to ask of ourselves, because we value dearly our discipline, and we want our students to have the full breadth and understanding of what we love doing and the discipline we love. But it's like when you're writing something and you write 10 pages and it's only supposed to be 1, and you have to go back in and kill your babies. You know, sometimes you have to ask yourself, is my program, have I created something that just can't be done in 2 years, and am I serving a 2-year student in that, if I do that? Does that make sense?
It does, and we've certainly spilled a lot of blood in the process. I think it more has to do with, well, I'll put it in terms for you, you're English, correct?
Yes.
So, how many students come to you and they want to be J.K. Rowling? But you look at their
That's the creative writing people. They're over there. I teach.
You know, in other words, you let them know, okay, where you're at right now, you're not going to be J.K. Rowling in 2 years, probably not even in 4. You know, so it's competitive and it's realistic that for a lot of students trying to go to a certain program at university, where they're at right now, they're not going to get in 2 years, no matter what we do to the program. In other words, their skill level is simply not that. And so, but we want to help them get that, but we want them to know and not be discouraged or crushed that, okay, here's what you're going to need to do, here's what we need to work on, and give them the tools to do that. And provide structures to do it, classes to do it, you know, alternate paths that you're not in the 2-year path yet. You're going to take a year to do X, Y, and Z, then you're going to get into the 2-year path.
Well, I think you're kind of answering your own question. It's about how you communicate to the student. Can you say that to them? Sure. Sure. If you have the information about where they're starting in terms of their need for developmental education, and you know how the prereqs are established in your courses so that when you do the numbers, it will take them longer. And if we're talking about individual ability within these skill-based disciplines, that's a squishier thing to assess, and that does require the faculty in those conversations with the student. As long as you're informing students why it is this way, then you're still within the spirit of what Guided Pathways is asking us to do, to provide informed decisions. So if the student says, well, my instructor was honest with me and said it's going to take me longer than 2 years to do this, then at least they know how to plan their time. They know if they want to go to summer school or not, and take additional coursework then. They have some better idea of how to stagger their coursework because you had that conversation with them. So I don't think what you're saying is contrary to Guided Pathways. I think it's in the spirit of Guided Pathways, but it's a hard conversation to have with students because we want them to move through it and finish their work in a timely way and be prepared to move on to the next level.
So we had someone over here.
That's okay. I was going to say, it's hard to kind of imagine both things when we look at the mission of community colleges, how that's, because everything we talk about mostly with Guided Pathways more transfer, or someone that's coming here for a 2-year plan, or so we think is defined as a 2-year plan. Some students are coming for certificates. But I think, so those conversations, I think, we haven't had those. We're focusing more on, because when we look at students, like as counselors, we do orientation, how many people want to transfer, more than half of the hands go up. So I understand where resources are going towards that. I don't think we've had conversations about the others and with the mission of community colleges.
But when talking about mapping and talking about meta majors, it's not just about transfer, right? It's about all of your degrees and the certificates that lead up to the degrees and the CT pathways and the transfer pathways, and it's really important to look at all of that, you know, in a comprehensive way.
And for the complexity of students, because some students will come for certificates, some will not want anything, some will want 5 just because they can.
Yep.
And so we can't control humans as far as that goes. But interesting to see how that conversation plays as we go further.
Right.
And again, it's not about controlling them. I understand what you're saying. It's not about controlling them, it's about informing them, right? Informing them in multiple ways, not just here are all the GE choices that you have. We all know what that sheet looks like, row upon row of course designators listed, but presenting them with something that gives them more information about the choices they make, whatever their particular goal is.
Yeah. I was just going to kind of add to what Peter was saying. You know, it's a conundrum because we are all here to help students who aren't prepared yet to do what they want to do, right? So he's in the music department. So I could walk into his class having absolutely no background in music and saying, please help me get better. I want to get to this place, right? Well, it's going to take me significantly longer to get to that place than somebody who's had piano lessons for 10 years. And so when we talk about acceleration and getting them to their goals in 2 years and all this stuff, it's hard for us to swallow that because we're here to serve all of the underrepresented students that come to us. So, you know, I guess I just wanted to add to what the spirit of what we're here to do is. And it's not contradictory to Guided Pathways, but it makes it more difficult to get it done because we want to serve every single student.
If we assume that every student has to fit into a pathway, then you're right, it isn't. But I don't think we have to assume that every student is going to fit into that 2-year. And the comment actually reminds me of what I said kind of when we started, when I had my faculty member tell me, Randy, there's nothing wrong with 6 years if that's what they need. So I don't think we have to lose that necessarily, but we do need to be taking steps for those students who don't want to be there for 6 years to make sure that everything is as clear as possible for them so that they can meet their goals.
Yeah, and I think that's the important part of the communication when we're educating people about what Guided Pathways is that we're not saying let's forget about the students who really need the extra help, but making it more efficient for the students who we can make it more efficient for.
Right, yeah, we're not trying to cull the student body of the students that are going to take more than 2 years.
Yeah.
There was somebody over here. Oh, okay, right. No, it was. Okay, I got here. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. No, I thought there was something.
I told you I have that kind of like it's somebody over there.
I saw it somewhere. Yes, that's what in counseling we have those conversations, and to me, I don't see Guided Pathways as so rigid in that a student has to follow this certain path. It's just a picture for them that this is where you're going to start and this is where you're going to end. But what's embedded into the pathways is those reminders and not nudges to make sure, okay, make sure you reapply for financial aid, make sure you do all these other, prepare for registration, make sure you see your counselor. It keeps them in perspective because a student can lose sight of where they're going when they're in the midst of their journey, and then they're like, I don't know where I'm at and where I'm going and where I've been. And so I think the map just kind of helps them to refocus on where they are and then where they need to go. So I can understand what Peter is saying and my colleagues as well in terms of the students who are going to take more than the 2 years. It's just something that if you want 2 years, this is what it's going to look like. But if it takes you longer, it's just going to extend that map a little bit further out. And I think the communication and keeping the students, giving that student the pictures and the visualization is going to help them to move forward.
Well, and I think that's a really important thing to point out, that idea of milestones, so that the college is actually noticing, wait a minute, you should have met this milestone, you haven't met it yet.
Right.
What's going on? And so there's actually that opportunity to circle back. And I find myself thinking about your implementation of Guided Pathways should have its own milestones so that you're checking back. Have we gotten to where we wanted to be? And if not, why not? So you're kind of putting that same guidance of yourselves and your local effort that you're trying to integrate with your students.
In some of the bullets you mentioned how we need to integrate certain technologies for students and Starfish and so forth. And also we mentioned professional development and always informing students and having information to the students. So there's some software, something that I want to get your thoughts on, like MyPath, professional development LMS like Cornerstone or Project Glue and eTranscript. What are your thoughts on those with regards to Guided Pathways and stuff like that?
I am not prepared to talk about this at all.
I can say a little bit. No. They're actually, last fall, the State Academic Senate passed a resolution supporting the use of the EPI, the Educational Planning Initiative suite of tools that includes CCC, MyApply. It's getting late, and I believe Starfish as well. And the endorsement was that these are potential tools that would align with the values of Guided Pathways. So the Senate does have a position actually on that software. And it is saying, sure, try it out. We support this. It is software that has been created by the system for the system. Even Starfish, which is proprietary, actually has worked with the EPI and other groups to make sure that it meets the needs of California students. So that's about the extent that I can say, not having used Cornerstone or any of the others, but the Senate did take a look at some of those tools, and it feels like it's a positive step.
And I'm at a college with a robust starfish implementation. We branded, our mascot is the Roadrunner, so somehow what we do with our students is beeps, beep beep. And it seems to be going over really well, so I think there's a lot that you can do with that. And if you don't have a degree audit system, that's probably something that you're working on. Do you have one now? Yeah. Okay, so you've got that.
But you're working on expanding it with your work plan. I think I saw it mentioned.
So just a quick question, is there a resource for the academic, this is interesting information that would be, I think would be beneficial for all 114 community colleges to know this, right? Is there a central resource? It's not on the Chancellor's Office website, because I looked, but maybe Academic Senate, do you guys have your resources and your writings for Guided Pathways, since this is such a huge initiative that the entire state is involved in?
So as Michelle alluded to earlier, there's a Guided Pathways Task Force. I think we're 8 or 9 members now from colleges across the state. We are taking a very multi-pronged approach to providing resources. All of the resolutions that have been passed related to Guided Pathways are available on the ASCCC site, but I think it probably would be useful to have it all on one page, right? One website, is what I hear you saying. You can request visits like the one that we're here doing today. On May 11th and 12th, there will be regional meetings. I think the one here is, the one south is, it's on that Friday.
It's the Friday, yeah.
But I forget the
I
location. I don't think we have a location yet. But that would be take what we've done today and expand it by 6 hours and add, 10 different topics to it. So those kinds of, and also every college is asked to appoint a Guided Pathways liaison so that the one-way communication, and do we have one? We have one, Jorge? Jorge is your liaison. So see, I knew I'd get you to do something. More. So having that person and that connection can be really useful as well. But just whatever you need is what we want to provide. It's just a matter of 114 colleges wanting it all at the same time, and they wanted it yesterday. So we're trying to catch up with the need as well. So there are mechanisms. I hope that answers your question in part.
Well, and there are resources that actively being developed all the time, and there's a great resource on student voices and different ways of getting that information. But the dissemination of those resources has not been effective, and there are lots of great art. And because I've been out there looking for resources, I know there's a bunch of great articles in the Senate rostrum that are super useful. And so there definitely is a need to bring all those things into one place, and then also point you out to the other resources that would be useful. We'll take that back. There needs to be,
It would be easier just to say, here's the website, go, and it'll take you everywhere you need to go. To have that kind of portal would be good.
Yeah, and I saw people they like that one slide with the circles and the 10+1. Yeah, to make sure here's that slide you liked. Put it right up there for people.
Thanks. Great suggestion. Right.
To go back to Peter's question, perhaps using a softer language that ideally it would be nice to get the degree done in 2 years, but if it takes longer for you, 3 years, it's okay. But what can we do to accelerate the whole program? And this is also tied to something that Dr. Kathy Scott has been telling all of us, and the counselors, they are one of the main pillars of the college. I always say that every time I get a chance. They have been disseminating this information. What the student like me who had never been to college doesn't know is that the financial aid Bob P. waiver doesn't last forever. You have 4 years, and then if you run out of your financial aid by being more in community college or 6 years, you have nothing going forward when you go to a 4-year college. And that's something that Dr. Scott has been drumming into our ears, and that's something that the students should also be aware of. Then that there's an incentive, there is a carrot and a stick. The carrot is, gee, how can we help you to move faster, because you need the financial aid as you move forward to a 4-year college.
That's a super good point. Really, I'm glad you brought that up, because when students wander around, as they do, and as I certainly did, and take all these different courses, the problem is how much financial aid are they using up in doing that? We want them to be able to do it to some extent, because they come in here and they don't know what they're doing, and they don't know what their interests are. that has to be guided to some extent, otherwise they could end up with 20, 30, 40 units. You know, how many students do we have that have more than 100 units and haven't completed yet? They're gonna go to a university and they're gonna run out. I mean, that is so important here, and I wouldn't want to lose sight of that. He's right.
I know most of the conversations usually focus on years, but I'm curious if there's any sense of across the state, how many, if you base it on units, like how many students in California who have completed 60 or earned 60 units have completed something? I mean, would that information be really different from just looking at it?
I think most of the time you do take most of the time you do sit there and get into that unit structure, because there is that recognition that you may have students that are taking 6 units a term. To talk about things in terms of years doesn't make any sense.
The last number I saw said that students who completed within 6 years had amassed 127 units on average. I'd have to dig into my computer to give you the source where I found that, but that was at a presentation I did with Janet Folks from Bakersfield a couple of weeks ago.
It just seems like if you ask yourself as a college, like, okay, once our students get 60 or even 70 units, how many of them are getting somewhere, and
Right.
that might inform it differently.
I mean, and this is where you need to sit down and look at your own data and see what patterns are happening, because that can get you to that. Here's the thing we need to fix. I wanted to point out a paper that is a really, it's not a long one, that is a really useful paper for having that conversation about guided pathways. It's Guided Pathways Demystified. It's written by someone who used to be part of our system and is now making money helping people with guided pathways. And it goes through different things, and there's the link, and we'll get everything to you. But that reference I made to that starting off with the same SAT score and then socioeconomic status sort of seeming to be the determining factor about how students do comes from this. And so some of the common concerns around this, is this just the latest fad? It doesn't seem like any of you are thinking that, but that's very much a common question that we hear.
Yeah, this is going to go away just like SLOs did, right?
Will I still get to teach blank? That course that someone really loves to teach, and they start to feel that course may be threatened. It may not fit into a pathway. This does not make sense for my students. That's one of those ones that you hear. Actually, so this is not from Guided Pathways Demystified. These are the ones that came off of the top of my head, I'm pretty sure, from things that I had heard. Shouldn't still students be able to explore? That's always a big one. Is that right? Or we've got the actual ones there. Is this from there? No, it's not, because here's a nice California one. Are Guided Pathways, AB 705, and performance-based funding a plot to fundamentally change our colleges? I heard that one a couple of times today.
Here's one that's near and dear to my heart. Won't we lose the heart of a liberal arts education when we make students' journeys more structured? Right? I'm an English teacher, right? I want exploration, and so are we gutting the notion of liberal arts by structuring the pathway? How you answer it is based on the pathways you design and the way you institute an institutional culture around pathways for students, right? And Bakersfield actually did create an area of interest, AKA meta major. Some people don't like that phrase, meta major. They created an area of interest for the wandering student who wants to have that experience. And one of the good things about doing that is they now have data on those students and how long it takes them to get anywhere. And as you can imagine, it takes a long time, and they amass a lot of units, and they don't walk away with anything in the time that they've had to collect that data. So that experience, that question, is very much something that I worry about and wonder about, but I also know that I have some control as a faculty involved in leading how we do our Guided Pathways framework. I have some control because this is something I value, and I'm going to do what I can to make sure that value is still there. It may not look exactly the way I think it looks now, but it will be there.
Yeah, so this is from that, I don't know my glasses, I can't see. But it gets at a lot of those sort of meaty things that faculty have concerns about, and that idea of college as an opportunity to explore. And again, it's not about not letting them explore, it's just providing guidance to that exploration.
It's letting them know what's going to happen if you do it. You want to take this course in philosophy, but it's not on your plan? Fine. Just realize here's what may happen later down the road. And it doesn't even have to be presented in that way. It's not like I'm talking to my kid, if you don't clean your room, you know what's going to happen. This will be an extension of your education. And some students may not have the luxury to say, oh, I've got $140 I can drop on this course, especially if they find out it will play no role whatsoever in their ultimate educational goal.
I just found myself thinking of, like, when you go to Netflix to select something, I look for the things that I've heard of or that have high ratings.
Yeah.
Or my husband will just grab anything. I was a good student, he wasn't. So I wanted that I gathered the information before I make my choices. He'd be okay. You could tell him I said that. It's okay. He'll get over it. But yeah, it's about informed choices. So I wanted to share this. I thought this was really useful. This is so it's very interesting what you learn when you troll presentations that other people have given at places. So this is a slide from a presentation done by our chancellor's office at a meeting of trustees. And what you see here are the things that you're supposed to be doing in which year with respect to guided pathways, sort of the big picture. And what you see is that in that first year, it's really about planning. It's about figuring out what you're going to do in the next year, and then slowly moving into the work. And so this is one of the slides that we put in for colleges that are kind of nowhere, so that they feel more comfortable with the fact that they are kind of nowhere, because that's absolutely normal. Even though all of us are somewhere, because this idea of figuring out how to help our students is nothing new to us.
In spite of that subtle pressure of before we adjourn, one of the things that I do have hesitation about this, and I understand it's coming, so either we craft it or it gets shoved down our throats, one way or the other. I understand that. But as a teacher, I've always considered my primary customer to be the student and the state of California. The student, so that they can go out with skills and earn a darn good paycheck. Whether they get a degree or not, whether they pass my class or not, have they gotten skills to go out? And I know that does not fit into the measurable outcome model because, well, you need to measure an outcome. And it's hard to go out and find people and look at their paychecks. Two, my second customer, the state of California, they need my students to earn higher paychecks so they can tax them. There is an inherent conflict of interest between that. Well, when there wasn't the big pressure on the time, to a degree, there really wasn't a conflict of interest. Now that there is more and more pressure being put on that, there is a conflict of interest. Do I simply pass on students without the skills so that they can get their degree in time, so that the school can now get its funding? Gosh, that doesn't sound like it's very nice. I think K through 12, with all due respect, has shown that we can teach students to pass tests and yet not acquire the skills or the understanding that they need. Is this really in the best interests of our students and the state? And do we craft a product that looks like everybody else because that's what everybody else is doing, that's the easiest way to go? Or do we craft a product that protects the students, the state, and the college?
This is where you have just very clearly articulated one of the reasons that to argue against performance-based funding that we've been arguing against ever since that started to be something that was whispered about amongst administrators in the California community colleges. And I think you have just, to the extent that the performance, to the extent that the proposed new funding formula and AB 705 are there to push us, you're absolutely right. It's creating, instead of looking at guided pathways as this transformation that we're going to do for the benefit of our students and the state, without that additional pressure of move them quickly so that you keep your funding, it happens. It's created contradictions. I think we particularly, that we as faculty need to maintain the quality, the integrity of what we do, and focus on that student first and foremost, and getting that student and delivering creating the product that you want, that the student that has the skills that makes us proud when they move on. We don't want to be just passing students on in order to get our funding, and we have to hope that as faculty that our administrators share that, and they share that same fear of having our system decay because of these pressures. Honestly, I'm with you. I think probably everybody is, because that there definitely are incredible contradictions in the pressures that are on us that aren't allowing us to embrace something that could be really good without fear.
But the fear is being put there. It is being undoubtedly 705 performance-based funding, whether it goes through or not. The bell's been rung, and that's the warning shot that this is coming. I think there's a sense in the system, possibly emanating from the Chancellor's office, that we haven't done enough. Even though we might feel that we've done everything we can, they feel that we haven't. And that's why the contradiction, right? They may not want to come right out and say it, but I think that's the underlying feeling. So now we've been legislated to do things.
Right.
So I think you nailed it, but unfortunately I don't know what else to do. And I don't say that to mean I'm throwing my hands up and complying. What I mean is, well, then I need to roll up my sleeves and get involved and do something different.
And we have to, the potential negative effects that there may be bad things that happen, and we may have to let the bad things happen in order to get the course correction that we need.
And this is why your data person or people are so important, because if it's not working, you need to document that it's not working, right? You need to, 3 years from now, look back and say, we tried this isn't working. Here's what's happening to our students. But we all hope that it is going to work.
So we have 2 more questions. So Elijah and then Kenna, and I think that's where we need to wrap up.
So I was just going to say that if the data from the California Acceleration Project is true, and the data that we've been seeing about cohort models for English and for math are true, I think we in some ways are missing an opportunity by focusing on the funding, because these efforts are not really about funding, they're about student success. The idea that we're placing students correctly, we know is not accurate, because if it were, then we wouldn't need to do alternative placements, and we wouldn't need to use multiple measures. So, I don't view guided pathways as an opportunity to chase funding. I view it as a way to correct some institutional issues that we've been facing, and I think that we will hopefully benefit from the fact that at times funding is aligned with what's in the best interest of students here.
I was involved in the BSI initiative, very familiar with the Poppy Copy, all these initiatives that have come forward, and none of them made a difference. And I think we're a unique college because of who our president was and his position now. We know how he operates, and I actually really appreciate the tension, because it's really hard to make change, and people fear change. Yet look at what we've done as a college you know, in the last few years. We have made significant change, and we've started to look at our internal processes and what students go through, and we started that before Guided Pathways. But the pressure is what catapults the change, and that's what Guided Pathways is about. It's about making transformational changes at the college so that it's a more productive environment for the students. So even though we don't like the funding formula and it's, you know, we feel like it's a really bad thing, I think it's a good thing in that it's providing pressure.
So any final words?
Is there any cheesecake left?
So please.
Thank you everyone for your attention. Thank you very much.
Wait. On behalf of the Long Beach City College, we would like to present you with a thank you, token of appreciation, cheesecake, and. So, other people, one more time for all this great information. So the dialogue will continue. So Kathy and I and the whole Promise Guided Pathway group will be having more conversations, and I know we're already preparing for our college day. So this is just the beginning. So thank you all for attending. Thank you all for staying, and have a great weekend.